Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And today on Perspectives, we'll learn about the term Jim Crow and a special exhibit at the USA Archaeology Museum that highlights the lives of three Mobile families during segregation. Now, if you're not familiar with that term, Jim Crow, well, it's a legacy of our American history. It was a term used in conjunction with state and local laws passed from the end of the Civil War in the 1860s through the early 1960s. The laws allowed white Southerners to reassert their dominance by denying blacks basic social, economic, and civil rights. Now, according to National Geographic, the laws were passed at different periods in the South to enforce racial segregation and to curtail the power of black voters. After the Civil War ended in 1865, some states passed what they call black codes that severely limited the rights of black people. Now, these codes limited what jobs they could hold and their ability to leave a job once hired. Some states also restricted the kind of property that black Americans could own. Efforts to enforce white supremacy by legislation, it increased, and black Americans tried to assert their rights through legal challenges. However, this effort led to a disappointing result in 1896 when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Plessy versus Ferguson that the so-called separate but equal facilities, including public transport and schools, were constitutional. Now, from this time until the Civil Rights Act of 1964, discrimination and segregation were legal and enforceable. Social, commercial, and legal discrimination, theaters, hotels, and restaurants, they were segregated and blacks were put into inferior accommodations or refused to admit them at all. The shops also would serve them last. Now, this was Jim Crow. Our guest today on Perspectives, Jennifer Knutson. She's the Assistant Director and Education Curator of the University of South Alabama Archaeology Museum. Originally from North Alabama, she has also excavated sites across northern Florida from St. Augustine to Pensacola. After a quick break this morning, we'll hear from a public archaeologist and educator about Jim Crow Mobile during segregation. It's through the lives of three local families. Jennifer Knutson from the University of South Alabama. She joins us in just a moment when Perspectives continues. And welcome back. Our very special guest today, Jennifer Knutson. She's the Assistant Director and Education Curator of the University of South Alabama Archaeology Museum. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, and thank you for having us.
You know, I really was inspired by your story as you were talking and sharing some things. You indeed have a love for what you do because you made some strong choices and decisions to go into this area. Tell us briefly about how you made the decision to go into archaeology.
Well, I was actually a civilian contractor in Iraq and in the Middle East, and being able to see the wonderful sites there. And I had always been an avid reader as a child of magazines like National Geographic. And I thought, I have made a good income for myself. What can I do with it? And I decided to go into archaeology, and I've been just in love with it ever since.
How many years now?
It's been about 14 years.
Okay, so truly a passion and a love for what you do. Now, this particular exhibit that we're talking about today is on archaeology and oral history. It's called Unwritten: Archaeology and Oral History of Jim Crow Mobile, highlighting the lives of three families during segregation, and we'll talk about that today as well. How did this come about? When did you all plan to make this happen? Was it something that came across, information sent to you, or what happened to get this here at South Alabama?
There were a number of things that started it. I began at the University of South Alabama at the museum in March 2021. We had been closed for a year and without a curator for 6 months. Soon after I started, the Alabama Historical Commission requested that the College of William and Mary, who had done 2010 excavations in Africatown, the Alabama Historical Commission requested that they bring those back to South and that they be curated in our curation facility. it was a privilege to be able to welcome those artifacts back to the city of Mobile. And I thought, how can I make sure that the public is also able to see these artifacts? Around the same time, I was invited to apply for a National Endowment for the Humanities grant. And I thought about what are things that people want to see and what are things that people want to know about that aren't normally covered in museum exhibits, and what is something new? What is something that can attract more audiences to the museum and also make it more accessible to people, and just bringing in a new topic and something we don't talk about a lot, and making the museum a welcoming space. So I put forth the narrative for the grant that we would do an exhibit based on previous collections, including the Africatown collection, and also South Alabama has been doing archaeology since 1970 in Mobile, and we've done over 1,400 projects on the Gulf Coast. So we have a lot of collections that people hadn't seen. So it was an opportunity to bring new people to the museum and new collections that people hadn't seen. And the NEH thankfully supported the project. They funded the project, and here we are.
That is a great way to get this inviting and open to the public, which is so important. Now, one of the things in this particular exhibit here that you shared with me, you included and you welcomed in the families as well as other community input to make this happen. Tell us about that.
So one thing that should become more and more as a normalized practice when we are working on exhibits that involve descendant communities, we should be consulting with them the entire way. So we brought this exhibit and our ideas to the community from the beginning of the exhibit, midway through the exhibit, getting feedback, making sure we're moving in the right direction, and then also at the end, we asked for a final review. And then the final step was, before we opened the exhibit to the public, we had a private reception opening for all of those consultants and reviewers and all the people who had given us feedback, and especially the families.
Now, who are these families, and how did you select these three of what could have been a huge volume of opportunities to select from?
So we did select museum curators, history professionals, and then well-known family members that are sharing the story to the public today that we had relationships with. And so they were very willing to help us, and we were very grateful for the help.
Okay, so the families that you have here as a part of the sharing their lives, the Lewis family, Owens, and Griffin families. Who are they?
The Lewis family are descendants of Charlie and Maggie Lewis, and Charlie and Maggie Lewis were part of the original survivors who co-founded Africatown, and they were the enslaved individuals that were brought over from West Africa in 1860.
On the Clotilda?
Yes.
Okay.
And so William and Mary excavated Lewis Quarters and Peter Lee's house in 2010. So we definitely asked those families to be involved. The second family is the Owens family, and though we've tried to contact descendants and sent many letters, we have not been able to find the Owens family. What makes the Owens family and the Griffin family unique is that we don't have those descendants or know where they traveled to. They were affected by urban renewal. And though they had lived many generations, in the case of the Owens family in Down the Bay and the Griffin family just off Davis Avenue, they had lived there for many generations. When urban renewal happened in the 1860s or the 1960s, they were essentially removed from the landscape, and we don't know where they went or what has happened to them. We would like to know more. The Owens family was very economic, enterprising family. They had a grocery store and sold possibly whiskey on their back porch, as you can see.
A shot house?
Yeah, or a hit house, as it's called.
Okay.
But people had to make a living. They had to provide for themselves, and having that side hustle, as we call it today, or even having employment without, bosses and being able to do for themselves was very important. In the case of the Griffin family, they're very interesting. The grandparents lived in the neighborhood really close. The grandfather, he was a huckster, or he sold oysters. Mm-hmm. And the son is Mr. Griffin. He is one of Mobile's first black postal clerks. Versus being a mail carrier. So that was very interesting to have his story. And then the mother and the daughter who lived in the home also ran a beauty salon. So you really see the evidence of people's daily lives, and you can see the artifacts from where they lived.
And then the enterprise that grew out of having to deal with what the system would allow at that time. And we're going to talk about that when we come back from a short break, because that's when we really get into the Jim Crow aspect of what it allowed you to do and what it didn't allow you to do. And I'm really curious to hear some of the information that you've learned over the last time of the period of time dealing with this and getting things up in place. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk more. Our very special guest today, Jennifer Knutson, and she's telling us all about a very special exhibit taking place at USA. Perspectives continues in just a moment. Welcome back. Today we're talking about an exhibit, a special exhibit, in fact, still at the University of South Alabama, and encouraging you to take a peek of this information, and then of course please go and see this before it leaves the end of this month. Is that April 30th, or what's the actual date?
It will leave April 30th, and the museum will close for the summer, and our final day open is May 2nd. Okay. So you may check it out May 2nd, but it is officially closed on April 30th.
Now you have it, you're going to take it on the road in a few places, right? Will the public be able to come and partake of that too?
We do have a traveling exhibit. It's a little bit smaller than the one at the museum, of course. Right now it's at Baker High School, so that's wonderful. And then it's next going to the Alabama School of Math and Science. And then this summer people will be able to see it at Government Plaza. Excellent. During the month of June.
Okay, this is something definitely to make sure we learn. So let's talk about that period. How many people seem to be familiar with the history of Jim Crow and what it actually meant in this part of the country?
I'm not sure what people know about Jim Crow, but I think it's important to know about it and to not just hear the words Jim Crow and automatically turn away. Like you did a wonderful introduction to what Jim Crow is. It was a structure that kept people from being able to be free, essentially. So in the exhibit, we have the Griffin family who lived off of Davis Avenue. Davis Avenue today is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. And what people might not realize about Davis Avenue during the time of Jim Crow is it was this thriving black metropolis, as W.E.B. Du Bois says. It was full of shops and theaters and dance halls and gas stations, restaurants, everything you can imagine, and wonderful clothing shops. And it became really economically prosperous. And of course, in Mobile, African Americans were forced to shop there, but it became such a special place that even white people started to shop there. So when black people were denied the right to shop at white stores, they made their own. And we see this time and time again, where being denied the services that they should have been able to have, they would go about and do it their own way and find their own resources and do it just as well or sometimes better.
And you know, it's interesting, if you come to places at different periods of time, you see different things. And for those who have come to Mobile, like I came here after the heyday of the Avenue, as some of the locals call it also, you know, have not seen anything of what it was, but having grown up as a black in America in Georgia, we had ours too. And so, of course, I've seen and I have an idea, only can I imagine what it was. And I hear so many talk fondly about Davis Avenue. And I always thought it was interesting of who the Davis was in the name of the street, that was, and so it was good to hear. We're going to call it the Avenue. We're going to call it
Yes.
Davis Avenue instead of Jefferson Davis. But when you look at some of the things that we mentioned earlier about people denied from, now this was a legal system in place, and it was not solely you deciding, well, yes or no, I'll do that, I won't do that, but there were penalties if you went against what was the law.
That's absolutely right. It was not a pleasant time. It was a hard time for African Americans. One wrong mistake and they could face penalties, including prison, financial penalties, and even death from vagabond justice.
You know, I read a story about a situation in another part of Alabama where three guys were just traveling, and it never said what they were traveling on or how. So I assume they were walking, and they walked through this town at the wrong time, per se, and they didn't have money to pay off the jailer, the sheriff at that time in that particular community. And so they were quickly arrested and put into the system, and they lost like 4.5 months of their life trying to pay off $6.60 per person. And when they shared the information of how the money ended up being paid to the mayor, the sheriff, it was just unbelievable. But this was the way things worked. And we were talking earlier before we came on air, and you were saying about capitalism. That's what capitalism was, making sure that they were getting sources, and they didn't care how they got it and what they did to you to get it.
That's true. That's true. And you can see in the exhibit a glimpse of the daily lives of people under this system who were doing okay. A lot of people were not doing okay. In the case of the exhibit, we have these families all own their own home. And so that is why we were able to tie these artifacts to particular people and particular families. But a lot of people in Mobile, we don't know who they are. And that's one of the reasons why I'm passionate about archaeology, is that we can see the people who are not always in the documents, the people whose names we don't know. We still get to learn about their daily lives. You earlier had a little fun play there with words. We talked about urban renewal, and the other word that comes, a lot of people will say with it at the same time, removal, because it did disturb a lot of lives. And any major southern city you go to, and even northern cities, and you see an interstate running through the downtown area, it makes you know that something happened here. I have to give credit to the Dora Franklin Finley African American Heritage Trail that is in Mobile. When we were building this exhibit and writing this exhibit, they kindly took us on a tour, and it was very clear driving down the avenue what had been removed and not replaced. There are, if you drive down the avenue today, there is empty lot after empty lot. One of those lots, for example, had the Finley Pharmacy, and everyone's aware, mostly who is from Mobile, of the Finleys and their impact on our city. And so you can see one empty lot where there once was a pharmacy that was available to people and people in this area that needed it, and now it's no longer there. And it's the same way if you look at Africatown. There used to be restaurants and shops and places to buy food and drinks, and now it is, you can't even buy a bottle of water in Africatown. Yeah. So the infrastructure that was supposed to be renewed was just removed. Destroyed in many cases too. And of course, so much history that we have to figure out how to make sure people learn. Any of this new legislation going to prevent you all at South from doing what you're doing now? Absolutely not. We have academic freedom. We are telling a story that is true. It is truly what happened. We have multiple lines of evidence, especially archaeological evidence, to support our claims. And At South, we are affected as a whole by the legislation. We are worried about how it will affect our ability to attract students of a diverse student body, which studies show when you have more diversity working on a problem, you have better solutions. And our students are going to go into the workforce that is very diverse. And so we want to make sure that we are still welcoming to all students who would like to attend South and all academics who would like to become faculty and do their research there. And I don't see how this legislation is going to prevent that. At South, that is one of our core mission statements, and I feel that we will continue.
Jennifer Knudsen, we thank you so much for joining us today and sharing, and we're all excited about the exhibit, which you will be extending until April 30th, and then I think you say maybe into May, early May, we can make sure we take advantage of seeing this a very special time. And of course, you're spotlighting the archaeology and oral history unwritten of Jim Crow Mobile, highlighting the lives of the Lewis, Owens, and Griffin families during segregation. We thank you so much for being here, and we're going to pop that information up. There we go, so you can take advantage of finding the location there at South Alabama, a very special exhibit. We encourage you to take your family, and especially the children, so they can learn too. Well, thanks for joining us here on Perspectives. Remember, you can find all of the previous episodes of the programs at Perspectives at fox10tv.com. We've got a lot there for you, and we hope that we'll see you next time here on Perspectives, and we'll have more great information for you then. Have a great day and week ahead.